I knew something was off the moment she started wearing lipstick to work. She never used to. Claire was always effortlessly beautiful, the kind of beauty that didn't need gloss or blush. She used to laugh at women who dressed up for the office, said she didn't need to play that game. But then the promotions opened up, and suddenly Claire was in the game. First, I thought it was nothing. People change, right? Maybe she just wanted to feel confident, professional. Maybe she was finally seeing in herself what I'd always seen in her. But then came the late nights, the strategy meetings after hours, the missed calls, the quiet texts she'd type with her back turned to me. And I was a fool. I told myself it was just the job, just stress, just her being ambitious. I wanted to believe in her because I loved her. God, I loved her. We'd been together 6 years, lived together for 3, talked about marriage, a house, even names for our imaginary future dog. I knew her, or I thought I did. Then I met him, her boss, Mitchell Reynolds. I remember the first time she introduced us. His handshake too firm, his smile too polished. The kind of man who made you feel small without even trying. His eyes lingered on her in a way that made my skin crawl. And Claire? She laughed too hard at his jokes, touched his arm like it was instinct. That night I couldn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling while she snored softly beside me, and something inside me cracked. I didn't have proof, just a gut feeling, coiled in my chest like a snake, ready to strike. Still, I waited. I watched. I kept silent, because love makes you stupid, but not blind. The signs kept piling up. New clothes, expensive ones, a handbag that cost more than my rent. She said it was a gift from the company, a bonus, she claimed. I wanted to believe her. I really did, until I saw the message. It was 2 weeks later. She'd left her laptop open, gone to shower. I didn't mean to snoop, but the screen blinked with a notification. A message from Mitchell. Just one line. Don't forget what you promised me tonight. This promotion isn't free. I stared at the screen, my heart pounding so loud I couldn't hear the water running in the shower anymore. Just that single line, glowing back at me like it was carved in fire. Don't forget what you promised me tonight. This promotion isn't free. My first instinct was denial. Maybe it wasn't what it sounded like. Maybe I was misunderstanding something, twisting words to fit the fear that had been gnawing at my gut for weeks. But deep down, I already knew. The truth wasn't just knocking. It had kicked the door down and was standing in my living room, uninvited and smug. I didn't say anything that night. Couldn't. Claire came out of the shower, wrapped in a towel, her skin still glistening. She smiled at me like everything was normal, kissed my cheek, asked if I wanted to order Thai. And I sat there, silent, nodding, pretending I hadn't just watched our relationship fracture into pieces I couldn't pick up. The next few days were a blur of fake smiles and tighter embraces. I watched her more closely, memorized her patterns. I noticed how she flinched every time I looked at her too long. I noticed how she avoided leaving her phone out of reach, how she always changed in the bathroom now, how she suddenly had early morning meetings on Saturdays. So I followed her. It was a Friday. She told me she was having a girls' night, drinks with coworkers. Said she'd be home late. I kissed her goodbye and smiled like a fool. Then I got in my car and trailed her cab downtown. She didn't go to the bar she mentioned. Instead, she walked into the Four Seasons. My stomach dropped. I waited outside for an hour, 2, 3. She never came back out. By the time she returned home, it was nearly 2 a.m. She tried to sneak in quietly, heels in hand, makeup smudged, her hair tousled like she'd been in a storm. I was sitting in the dark, waiting. Her eyes widened when she saw me, like a child caught stealing cookies. Only the jar was our entire future. I can explain, she said, and I laughed. I laughed so hard I thought I might choke. Because there's nothing left to explain when someone sells their body for a title. When ambition costs more than love. When the person you trusted most uses your loyalty as a stepping stone. I didn't yell. I didn't throw anything. I just sat there and listened to her lies unravel one by one, like a spool of thread with no end. She told me it was just once. Then she told me it happened twice. Then she stopped counting. She cried. Of course she did. They always cry when they're caught. Not when they're guilty. Not when they're tearing your soul apart behind your back. But when the lights come on and they're no longer playing in the dark. Claire sat on the edge of our couch, the same place where we used to binge-watch sitcoms and talk about baby names, and she cried like her tears could rewind time. I didn't say a word. I just watched her, wondering how many nights I'd lain awake while she was in someone else's bed, chasing power dressed as passion. She said it started with compliments. Late nights at the office, mentorship, drinks that turned into dinners, dinners that turned into hotel keys. Mitchell made her feel seen, she said. He told her she had potential, that she was too talented to be stuck in middle management. He offered her opportunities, connections, promotions. But there was a price. He never said it outright, not at first. Just little things. A hand on her back that lingered too long. A text late at night. A compliment that slid just beneath her skin. And Claire, in her ambition, her hunger to rise, didn't walk away. She leaned in. And then, eventually, she agreed. It wasn't love. She made that very clear. It wasn't about you, she said, like that was supposed to make it better. I never stopped loving you. But I wasn't sure if that made it worse. She hadn't fallen for another man. She hadn't been swept off her feet by some romantic fantasy. No. She had calculated her betrayal. She had exchanged intimacy for leverage, loyalty for a LinkedIn title, our years together for a line on her resume. And what's more devastating than knowing you lost to something so cold, so transactional? I asked her if she ever thought of me. If, during any of it, she remembered the nights I stayed up helping her practice for presentations, the weekends I canceled plans so she could study for certifications, the times I held her while she cried over feeling unseen at work. She couldn't answer. That silence was my answer. I packed a bag that night. Just a few things. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew I couldn't sleep next to her another night. Couldn't wake up to the smell of coffee and pretend nothing had changed. Couldn't lie to myself anymore. As I reached the door, she grabbed my arm. Please, she whispered. Don't leave me. I can fix this. But some things, once broken, don't get fixed. They just stay shattered, sharp and dangerous, waiting to cut you all over again. I didn't sleep that night. I found a cheap motel on the edge of town, the kind where the walls are too thin and the silence feels loud. The air smelled like bleach and desperation, and the mattress was harder than concrete. But at least it was honest. At least it didn't pretend to be something it wasn't. Unlike Claire. Lying there in the dark, I kept going over everything in my head. Every smile. Every shared meal. Every moment I had been building a life with her while she had been building an escape ladder, one rung at a time, climbing over my trust, stepping on my love, using my faith in her as nothing more than leverage. And the worst part? I still missed her. That's the twisted nature of betrayal. It doesn't erase love. It poisons it. Turns it bitter, corrosive, but still somehow alive inside you, like a parasite feeding off your hope. The next morning she called. Then she texted. Then she emailed. She begged. She pleaded. She wrote long messages about mistakes and weakness, about how she was manipulated, how it wasn't really her, how the pressure got to her, how she was just trying to survive in a man's world. And maybe that was true. Maybe the system is broken. Maybe ambition comes at a higher cost for women. But this wasn't about the system. This was about us. About her choices. About how she looked me in the eye for months while living a lie so deep it swallowed everything we'd built. She even had the nerve to say she did it for us. That she thought if she could get the promotion, we'd finally have the money to settle down. To buy a house. To start a family. As if sleeping with her boss was a down payment on the American dream. I didn't respond. I couldn't. Instead, I quit my job that Monday. Left a resignation letter on my desk and walked out without saying goodbye. I couldn't bear the thought of returning to the same daily grind, the same loop of pretending. Everything suddenly felt hollow. My routine. My apartment. My life. I moved in with an old friend across town. Just a couch and some space to breathe. He didn't ask questions, just handed me a beer and told me to stay as long as I needed. That small kindness meant more than anything Claire had offered in months. Weeks passed. She kept reaching out. Flowers at the door. Voicemails. Letters. A bracelet I once said I liked, mailed with a note. I remember everything. Please come home. But home isn't a place. It's a person. And the person I thought was home didn't exist anymore. The thing about betrayal is that it lingers. It doesn't end when the door closes or when the suitcase is packed. It sits with you in quiet moments. In the silence between songs. In the empty space on the bed where someone used to breathe beside you. I'd catch myself reaching for my phone to text Claire about something stupid, a funny meme, a song on the radio, a weird ad I saw, and then I'd remember. I'd remember that the person I wanted to share my life with had already sold pieces of it to someone else. I started going to the gym more. Not because I suddenly cared about fitness, but because sweating was better than thinking. I needed noise, movement, anything to outrun the stillness. Because in stillness, my mind would drift back to her. To us. And to him. I couldn't stop imagining him. Mitchell Reynolds. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his smug face. Heard his fake-ass laugh. The way he looked at Claire like she was a thing to be used, not a woman to be respected. I hated him. But more than that, I hated what he represented, the power, the smug entitlement, the ability to take what he wanted and walk away clean. Part of me wanted revenge. Not the dramatic movie kind, but something real. Something that would make him feel even a fraction of what he'd made me feel. I started thinking about writing to HR, about exposing the relationship. I'd seen the texts. I had timestamps. Receipts. She might have gone along with it, but he was the one in power. He manipulated her. Used her. That had to count for something, right? But every time I came close, I stopped. Because dragging her name through the mud wouldn't clean mine. Because stooping to his level wouldn't lift me up. Because I didn't want my story to end with spite. So instead, I focused on rebuilding. Slowly. Painfully. I got a new job. Nothing fancy. Just enough to keep me going. I started cooking again, real meals, not just takeout. I reconnected with old friends. Some offered sympathy. Others shared their own stories, their own heartbreaks. And in that shared pain, I found something I didn't expect. Clarity. Claire had betrayed me. She had traded love for ambition. But that didn't mean I had to stay broken. That didn't mean I had to carry her decision like a scar I'd never heal from. She made a choice. Now it was my turn to make mine. It was around month 3 when I finally saw her again. Not planned, not expected, just one of those cruel tricks the universe likes to play when you're finally starting to breathe easier. I was grabbing coffee near my new office, just a quiet afternoon ritual I'd come to rely on. And there she was. Claire. Standing in line, scrolling through her phone, looking almost exactly the same but somehow smaller. Not physically, but diminished. Like the shine she once carried so effortlessly had dulled. She noticed me before I could slip out. Her eyes widened, surprise first, then hesitation, then something close to guilt. I gave a small nod. I didn't owe her a smile. And I sure as hell didn't owe her conversation. But she stepped forward anyway. Hey, she said softly, like we were old friends and not two people severed by betrayal. You look good. I didn't respond. Just raised my eyebrows, waiting. I've been meaning to reach out again, she continued. But I figured you needed space. I didn't want to push. I almost laughed. Push? She had pushed me out of my own life. Pushed me into a spiral. Into a motel. Into therapy, if I'm honest. And now she was worried about space? Still, I stayed silent. Then she dropped the mask. Her voice cracked. I got the promotion, she said. A regional director now. Title, office, the whole package. I studied her. She was fishing, maybe for approval, maybe for permission to feel proud. Maybe to convince herself it was worth it. But I didn't give her what she wanted. Was it worth it? I finally asked, my voice flat. She blinked. And for a moment I saw something behind her eyes. Not pride. Not regret. Just exhaustion. I thought it would be, she whispered. I thought if I just got there, everything would make sense. But all I feel now is tired. We stood in silence, the hum of the cafe around us, two ghosts caught between timelines. I'm sorry, she added. Not just for what I did. For how I made you feel. You didn't deserve that. I didn't nod. I didn't forgive. But I appreciated the words. They weren't enough, they never would be, but they were something. I hope you find peace, I said finally, and I meant it. Not because I still loved her, but because I didn't. And that, more than anything, was the real closure. She nodded slowly, stepped aside, and I walked out. That was the last time I saw her. Not just in person, but in my mind, in my heart. The final scene in a movie I didn't choose to star in. And as I stepped into the sunlight, I realized something. Sometimes, the best revenge isn't rage. It's resilience. Life has a strange way of moving on without asking if you're ready. Days blurred into weeks, and before I knew it, my routine had shifted into something that resembled peace. Not the loud, triumphant kind, but the quiet kind that comes from simply surviving. Waking up without dread. Drinking coffee without bitterness. Listening to music without flinching at every love song. There were still echoes of her, of course. A song on the radio. A smell in the air. A memory triggered by something so small it felt like betrayal all over again. But they came less frequently now and with less venom. I started writing again, something I hadn't done in years. Just little things at first. Thoughts. Letters I'd never send. Pieces of pain I needed to set free from my chest. Words that helped me reclaim a voice that had been muted by her choices. In those quiet hours, I rediscovered parts of myself I hadn't realized were missing. Passions buried beneath compromise. Confidence chipped away by slow erosion. And somewhere in the process, I stopped asking, why did she do it, and started asking, what do I do next? People think healing is a straight line, but it's not. It's messy. Nonlinear. Some days I felt invincible. Other days I saw a couple laughing at a bus stop and had to fight the urge to scream. But the distance between the good days and the bad days started to grow. That was progress. I reconnected with my family, something Claire had subtly discouraged. Not outright, but in those small manipulative ways, making plans that clashed with visits, raising eyebrows at phone calls, making me feel guilty for needing anyone but her. But now I leaned into those relationships. Sunday dinners. Late-night calls with my sister. Laughing with my dad over beers. They reminded me that love didn't have to hurt to be real. And then, one ordinary Thursday, something unexpected happened. I met someone. Not in a dramatic rom-com kind of way. Just a casual conversation at a bookstore. Her name was Rachel. She asked for a recommendation on a novel I was holding. We talked for 5 minutes. Then 10. Then she gave me her number. I didn't call her that night. Or the next. I hesitated, not because I wasn't interested, but because I was scared. Scared of repeating history. Scared of trusting again. Scared of being wrong about someone again. But eventually, I did call. And we talked. And then we met for coffee. And it was easy. No pressure. No games. Just two people, honest and open, trying to figure out if broken pieces could ever feel whole again. And for the first time in a long time, I started to believe they could. Rachel was nothing like Claire. And maybe that's why being around her felt like breathing after holding my breath for years. There was no performative charm, no veiled ambition hidden beneath compliments. She didn't try to impress me, and that, ironically, impressed me most. She listened. Really listened. When I spoke, she looked at me like my words mattered. And for someone who had spent months feeling like a placeholder in his own relationship, that was more powerful than I knew how to explain. We took things slow. I told her, early on, that I had been through something that had left more scars than I liked to admit. She didn't pry, didn't push. Just nodded and said, we all carry something. There was a calmness to her that made me feel like I didn't have to pretend. Like I could just be me. And that was enough. One night, a few months in, I finally told her everything. About Claire. About Mitchell. About the night I saw that message, the 4 seasons, the lies, the unraveling. I told her about the motel, the depression, the anger, the shame. I expected her to flinch, maybe even pull away. Instead, she reached for my hand and held it in silence for what felt like hours. You didn't deserve that, she said. But I'm glad you survived it. Because now you're here. That moment didn't fix everything. But it changed something. It reminded me that healing doesn't come from forgetting, it comes from being seen, completely, and still being accepted. And slowly, I began to rebuild not just a life, but a self. I went back to therapy. Not because I was broken, but because I wanted to understand my patterns. Why I ignored red flags. Why I equated loyalty with sacrifice. Why I kept pouring love into someone who treated it like currency. I learned that being betrayed doesn't make you weak. It makes you human. But staying bitter, that's a choice. And I didn't want to live in that space anymore. Rachel and I traveled together for the first time that spring. Just a weekend upstate, quiet and simple. But I remember lying next to her in a cabin surrounded by trees, listening to the rain on the roof and thinking, this is peace. Not excitement. Not adrenaline. Just calm, solid, unshakable peace. Claire was just a shadow by then. A chapter one no longer reread. She reached out once more. An email. Short. Civil, she was moving to a new city. Said she'd heard I was doing well. Wished me happiness. I didn't respond. Not because I was angry, but because I was done. Some stories don't need sequels. There's a quiet dignity in walking away from the past without dragging it behind you. It took me a long time to understand that forgiveness isn't about the other person, it's about releasing yourself. I didn't forgive Claire for her sake. I forgave her for mine. Because every time I replayed the betrayal, every time I questioned my worth, I gave her more power than she deserved. And I was done letting her decisions define my self-perception. By the time the 1-year mark came around, 1 year since the night I saw that message, since the facade fell apart, I didn't mourn. I didn't drink. I didn't rage. I simply lit a candle, made myself dinner, and sat in silence, honoring the man I used to be and the one I was becoming. Growth isn't loud. It doesn't announce itself with fireworks. It creeps in through the small decisions, choosing not to call, choosing to stay kind, choosing to believe again. Rachel was by my side that evening. She didn't ask for details. She just held my hand and said, "You've come far." And she was right. I had. I had crawled through a betrayal that nearly broke me. I had rebuilt trust, first in others, then in myself. I had learned to love without losing who I was. I think that's the hardest part of betrayal, rediscovering the version of you that existed before someone else's choices wounded your faith in people. But when you do, when you claw your way back to yourself, it feels like reclaiming a home you forgot you owned. I started volunteering on weekends, something I'd always wanted to do but never made time for. Helping others reminded me that pain, while deeply personal, is also universal. Everyone has been hurt. Everyone has been left. Everyone has been lied to. But we're all just trying to stitch our hearts back together with whatever thread we can find. That spring, Rachel and I moved in together. It wasn't impulsive. It was intentional. A conversation full of honesty, plans, and shared goals. It felt right, not because it was perfect, but because it was built on truth. No secrets. No manipulation. Just mutual respect and the willingness to grow together. And as I unpacked the last box in our new apartment, I came across something I hadn't seen in months, an old photo of Claire and me. We were smiling, arms wrapped around each other, before everything fell apart. For a moment, I considered tossing it, burning it. But then I paused. Instead, I slid it into a drawer, deep and out of sight. Not because I was holding on, but because I no longer needed to let go. Time doesn't heal all wounds, that's a lie people tell themselves to sleep at night. What time does, if you let it, is give you space. Space to grow around the wound. Space to build something new beside the ruins. And in that space, I found myself again. Not the man I was before Claire, but someone better. Stronger. Wiser. A man who no longer mistook loyalty for love, who understood that real love doesn't come with conditions or hidden costs. A man who knew that his value wasn't tied to whether or not someone else saw it. Rachel and I built a life with intention. We had boundaries, we had communication, and we had grace for each other's pasts, for each other's fears. There were still moments when shadows tried to sneak in. When I'd hesitate before sharing something too vulnerable, or when she'd catch me lost in thought after a familiar trigger. But we faced those moments together. We named the pain. And we kept choosing each other day after day. One evening, while we were walking in the park, the kind of ordinary evening that once felt impossible, she turned to me and said, "You're different when you talk about your past now. You don't sound broken." I smiled. Because she was right. I wasn't broken. I had been cracked open, sure. But sometimes cracks let the light in. And in that light, I had found resilience. I had found new dreams. I had found a love that didn't ask me to shrink. Claire? She became a story I once lived through. A memory with edges smoothed by distance. I didn't hate her anymore. I didn't wish her well, but I didn't wish her harm either. She had made her choices. I had made mine. And that was enough. People think betrayal is the end. That it shatters something so completely you can never trust again. But here's what I know now, betrayal is just a detour. A brutal, painful detour, but not the end of the road. Because I'm still here. Still standing. Still loving. And if you're reading this, nursing your own wounds, questioning your worth after someone else's lies, I want you to know this. You will survive. You will rise. And one day you'll look back not with pain, but with pride, not because of what they did, but because of how you chose to live anyway. This isn't a story about what she took from me. It's a story about everything I reclaimed. And in that I found something greater than revenge. I found peace.